the tefillah together. People want to follow along or just listen. It's fine. You're someone from Necha. You Yelveinu Le'Avotenu She'Lo Echshal Dvar Lecha. Esmachu bi Chavirai V'Lo Gidol Tahor Tamei V'Lo Tamei Tahor V'Lo Asur Mutar V'Lo Mutar Asur V'Lo Yichashvu Chavirai B'Dvar Lecha V'Esmach B'Hem Adonai Yitem Chachma Mipi V'Da'at U'Tfuna Gal Einai V'Abitam Niflos Mitorotzecha. So we're in our Chazara session still. We finished Os Vav, and we're trying to do with this Chazara not just to review the material, but also to kind of create a link in the chain, so to speak. Since the underlying premise of this whole book is that there's some type of a progression from the beginning of the Aleph Beis throughout. So to try to link those themes together. So we're talking. So we talked about Aleph through Daled really is the coming it's a very ethereal space. It's a very conceptual space. Aleph is talking about just getting into the modality of speech, recognizing that just achieving authenticity is a challenge in and of itself. Right? Just by saying the right words, it's not going to get you there. There's a fundamental gap between our inner experience and communication, and to understand that communication is always trying to bridge the seemingly unbridgeable gap and trying to be metargame, to translate, so to speak. And then Bays is the task of beginning to formulate tools and to block out distraction from temptation, distraction of being too theoretical, right? As we said, right, the guarding from the top is a challenge, right? Gimel, we're already experiencing a sense of independence, of being able to weigh values, right? Which is alluded to in the idea of Gomel. Gomel is talking about just reward. So the independence in the sense that we can have our own subjective value, let's say measurements of the world. Dalet is beginning to experience the constriction of the world, right? The dalut, the poverty, right? But that constriction is leading you to the goal that you need. Every single person, the constriction that they experience is almost by definition. I would say it's almost by definition. I think it is by definition. The constriction that a person experiences is always pointing them to the goal. Right? To the most mundane of examples, a person feels hungry. That constriction is pointing them to the fact that they need to eat something. That's the constriction, right? So all constriction is pointing you to the delet, to the door. And we talk about hey, which is the experience of the individual, realizing that he's not just an individual, but he's also facing the whole plethora of other individuals, right? The hey is represented by the yud facing the daled. The daled, as we talked about in Os Daled, one of the themes of Dalet is that it's the spread out multiplicity of the world. So it's the Yud, the individual facing the multiplicity, realizing that they have to contend with the other, with the multitude of the other. And then the Vav is kind of the solution to that problem in a way. How is that? Because the Vav, as Rav Kook puts it so beautifully, it's embodying the Brit Shalom, right? The covenant of peace. So it's the rallying cry, as it were, right? The inspiration that all the specificities are able to rally around. So at the group level, right? It's talking about themes of leadership, of being able to communicate values that even if the individuals don't necessarily get along, they can at least all rally around this thing because it's meaningful to everyone. And from the perspective of the individual, we talked about the importance of giving yourself inspiration. People think about inspiring in the sense of I need to inspire other people, but really the first person to inspire is yourself. Yeah. So if you're able to, if you need to think of something consciously, to take time to think of something that it's inspiring enough to yourself that all of your kochos, right, the multitude within you, all the kochos within you can rally around that thing. Yeah. So that's where we left off with Os Vav, and now going into Os Zayin. So starting off with the lashon of Rav Kook himself in Os Zayin, he says, "K'shachayim ba'im mesusam kvar rabu negdam hamonim v'hamafriyim." Right, so this is experiencing outward opposition, right? Forces that are trying to shut down the kochos hachayim, trying to shut down the forces of life. And so the Zayin, it embodies first of all the klei Zayin, the klei milchama, right? The tools of war that give the person the ability to fight back. And the other connotation of Zayin is mitoch merkaz yibanei hazayin et ma'arachot binyanav halochemet hi ba'atzma gam kin tchunat mechalkelet v'zana. The same forces that create the weapons of war, the ability to fend off the forces that are trying to crush life, from that same force comes the power of the kalkala, of the sustaining or the thing that provides nutrition, right? Tizuna, nutrition, hazon, asa'olam kula b'tuvo. God sustains the world. He provides sustenance for the world. So there's the idea of war, and there's the idea of sustenance, which are coming from the same side. I think we describe them as two sides of the same coin. That the most primal yearning for life, from that comes the ability to fight off aggression, and it also is the thing that provides and gives sustenance. And we talked about this in the last time around, but I remember that when we talked about it in the actual shir, I left out a piece. We talked about two sections from the Nevi'im that highlight this very theme about how tools of sustenance can turn into tools of war and vice versa. So we quoted the psukim from Yeshayahu, which are the most famous example of this. Right, the pasuk that's written on the entrance to the United Nations. Yeah, right. V'chitatu charvuseim the team v'chanisosam lemazmeros, that they'll beat their weapons into agricultural tools. Now, what's very interesting about this, we gave half the story last time. We quoted the pasuk from Yoel last time. The pasuk from Yoel also uses the same terminology, but he uses it in the opposite way. Kitu itechem l'charevos. You're going to take the pruning sticks and beat them into swords. Umazmerosechem l'ramachim. Excuse me, the opposite. The plowshares you'll beat into swords, and the pruning sticks you'll beat into spears. Hachalash yomar gibor ani. Even the weak among you will say, "I am strong and I can fight." So this is the opposite. When there's a time of extreme crisis, the tools that are usually used for tzuna, for sustaining, now become tools of war. Now, there's a third section in the Nevi'im, in the Navi Micha. The Navi Micha is almost an exact replica of the Psukim in Yeshayahu, meaning the version of taking the tools of war and making them into agricultural tools. But this is from Perek Dalet in Micha. This is the part that we didn't talk about. It will be established. The mountain of God will be established in top of all the other mountains. And many nations will come forth and say that we want to come up and learn the Torah right directly from the mouth of God, and He'll teach us in His ways. Right, v'shafat ben amim, and God will bring proper justice to the world. V'chitetu charvuseim liitim, and the result of this will be that they will take their swords and beat them into plowshares. V'chanisoseim lemazmeros, and their pruning sticks, their spears into pruning sticks. Lo yizor goy al goy charev. No one will lift a sword up to each other. Now, what's very interesting about this is that there's a very powerful relationship between these three prophets. It's Rebbe Talmud Rebbe, right? So Yeshayahu was the first one among them. His student was Micha. And Micha's student was Yoel. And you can see that it gets more and more extreme as it progresses. This is very interesting. Yeshayahu starts off very, very plainly. This is the prophecy that Yeshayahu ben Amos saw. It will be when the world achieves its pinnacle. The mountain of God will be established amongst all the mountains, and the Goyim will come and say that we want to learn the Torah and we want to be taught in God's ways, and they'll turn their weapons into agricultural tools. It's very plain. Yeah, Micha, his Talmud, it gets a little bit more intense. He starts off like this, and by a little bit, I mean a lot. He says, right, Ve'omar Shimuna Roshe Yaakov. Listen to me, O you chieftains of Yaakov, Uktzine Beis Yisrael, and the officers of Israel. Halalachem ladas mishpat. You must know this mishpat that is being meted out against you. Sonei tov, you all hate the good. Ve'ohavei ra, and you love evil. Gozlei oram me'alehem, you steal the skin off of people. Ushe'era me'alas mosam, and their flesh from their bones. So right off the bat, he's saying you're all irredeemably corrupt and you're terrible and you're going to be judged for all of this. Va'asher ochlu she'er ami ve'oram me'alehem, and those who eat the skin off of my people and strip the flesh off of their bones, pitzechu uforshu kasher basir, they will be crushed in the same manner that meat is crushed when it's thrown into the pot, uchabasar betoch kalachas, and flesh that's thrown into the frying pan. Meaning the same thing that you're doing to my people, I'm going to do to you. And he's talking to the Jewish leaders, meaning the leaders of the Jewish people. You're irredeemably corrupt. All you're doing is leveraging your power in order to, eat off the people. And that's what I'm going to do to you. And then he says the potential for correcting this is that the Mount of God will be the center of all the mountains, and everyone will come to learn the ways of God, and they'll turn their weapons into agricultural tools. That's more extreme, yeah.
What's the reason? It's just just because of the time.
Things are getting worse. Yeah, meaning Yeshayahu is prophesizing at a time where things aren't really as bad yet. Micha is his student, the king that comes in after Chizkiyahu, the primary king of Yeshayahu's time, is his son Menashe, who's like really really bad. He's the king that rules the longest through in all the Davidic kings, even more than David. He rules for 55 years. Yeah.
Because they were united.
Who was united?
In a bad way. But they were all kind of the same.
Right.
People.
That's true. Yeah. So it's getting more extreme. Yeah. So by Micha, he's pointing out the corruption that's getting really, really bad, and there's going to be judgment for that. Right? But he says, but listen, it's still correctable. It's still correctable. You can still achieve this utopian vision that I'm describing. But by Yoel, which is the third generation, he's like, there's going to be a crisis, and you kind of like the only way out is through. You kind of just have to go through.
They're actually saying that nowadays you can create this utopian of Mashiach, or we're saying in the end of times this is what's going to be happening.
So obviously there's always two layers of whatever the Nevi'im are talking about. They're talking almost always they're talking to people in their time. They're addressing a situations going on. But by definition, the fact that it was written down and being told to us means that it has implications for all time. So yeah, this is a good question. Here he is talking to people. He's saying, "You, O corrupt leaders of the people, I'm talking to you. This is the situation you have to deal with." And Yoel, again, the third generation, right? Not the student of Yeshayahu, but the student of the student. He's saying, "No, it's going to be the opposite way. People are going to take their agricultural tools and turn them into weapons because it's gotten this bad. There's going to be violence." Yeah. Who was the king then? So he almost certainly was the same king. Again, he has a 55-year. He has rules for half a century, so he's around for a long time. So he's able to.
Boiling pot when he was captured in the boiling pot and the tshuva at the end, or
so Sefer Malachim seems to imply that Menashe just ends. He dies in his wickedness, but in Divrei Hayamim it says explicitly that because of his exile, he's captured by the king of Babylonia. He's captured by the right. He's captured by the enemy king, and he's taken off to exile. And in exile, he does tshuva, and he's brought back to Judea, and he's able to finish off his reign, and he passes away in the land of Israel. So there is like a happy end. But they're all like talking about this coming. Even Yeshayahu, the Gemara in Yevamos says that the way that Yeshayahu, the prophet, dies on Daf Mem Daled in Yevamos. It says that Yeshayahu is assassinated by Menashe. That's how Yeshayahu dies. He's hunted down by King Menashe, and that's how he passes away. So they're all talking like this period, like the worst, the darkest days of the Judean kingdom, or the darkest days before the eventual Babylonian exile. Anyway, just to bring up that point, I thought it was very interesting to see this progression, these themes like acting themselves out, these powerful primal life driving forces that, depending on the circumstance, respond in different ways, either with the way that it's ideal, the ideal way of providing sustenance, providing food, providing nutrition, whether that's physical nutrition or spiritual nutrition. But that same force can also react with aggression when it's met with aggression. So again, the primary lesson of the Zion is to have a self-appreciation for the life force within someone, which can be activated to even opposite extremes when put in a state of crisis. Yeah. So this is the underlying vitality, let's say, that is alluded to in Os Zion. Anything else worth highlighting here on Zion Chazal?
Is it similar to anger?
I don't think it's. I don't know. I don't think it's similar to anger. Anger is a very ego-driven emotion. Chazal don't have nice things to say about anger. It says in the Gemara in Shabbat that a person, there are certain situations where a person is permitted to pretend to be angry.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And right, it says if a person has people that are under him, for example, right, like small children that are acting out or disciples that are acting out, he can pretend to be angry to drive the point home, to show them that, right, to show them like this is serious business, we're not joking. Yeah. But anger itself, right? It says in the Gemara in the Nedarim, if I'm not mistaken, it says that someone who's in a state of anger, it's like the Yetzer Hara is now in the driver's seat. Like they're not able to actually function. I don't think it's anger. It's mostly I think it's aggression. Aggression is not an inherently negative thing. Is the most primal drive for life. It's the drive for life. It's the kochos achayim welling up inside of a person and saying, "I want life. I want to live." And that is meant to be right. The ideal way that that's expressed is in this nurturing zan way, right? Nurturing, providing sustenance. But in extreme circumstances, it is also the very foundation for aggression, to fight off the kochos that are trying to shut down life. It's the same force. So what the Zion, so to speak, is calling out, as it were, is calling out for us to do, is to have deep resonance with that primal life drive in order to be able to wield it in the appropriate way.
Stages of development of a child. It seems like they start to communicate. They're not aware.
It seems like it parallels. I couldn't give like an expert definitive commentary on that, but it does kind of sound like that, right? It sounds like achieving more and more self-awareness, independence in the context of crashing up against the other, and more facets of consciousness begin to develop, right?
I personally clearly see development of the human stages over life. I totally see it. So.
There's a Rav that comes here to pray once in a while. He was here on Friday night, Rav Ari Schwartz. So he's coming out with a new sefer called The Spiritual Wisdom of Rav Kook. He wrote another book a few years ago on Rav Kook, also The Spiritual Revolution of Rav Kook. And now he's coming out with another book, The Spiritual Wisdom of Rav Kook. And he writes there about several instances that he's aware of that there are clinicians, like actual clinicians, that apply certain teachings of Rav Kook in those contexts, like trained psychologists and psychiatrists will of Rav Kook in their practice, which is very interesting. So we should all buy the book. Anyway, so he was sitting right here on Friday night. Yeah. Hashever Shabbat. So we're up to Osches now. Hashever Shabbat b'tzirim hamitnagdim ze lazeh adiyalim hasotrim ze et ze. So we talk. So this is now coming into Ches. One of the pitfall, so to speak, that's experienced in Ches is the pitfall of two ideals that are now clashing up against each other. How is that represented in the actual letter itself? Because the Ches is literally just two Zions that are connected to each other. Right. So the Zion in of itself is the primal drive for life. Now you have two Zions that are now facing each other. So what are you supposed to do if you have two life drives that are now facing each other? So what do you do in order to mediate that? So I'm reading from Parish over here, since he puts it very, very well. Kasher kochot mitnagchim. They're literally like bashing up against each other. They're goring each other. So when two ideals clash each other, it creates a fracture. This is this could be referred to as another stage of development. The person has two ideals. He didn't realize until now that the ideals kind of contradict each other. So that creates a crisis. Gam hapoel, right? Even the word ches means fracture. The word ches means to break. Right? Chitat, hamipateh, pachad otzmati, chitat ha'elohim. We talked about how the word chitat is used in the Torah to describe this terror that renders someone into a state of paralysis, like they're not able to move. So that's kind of what a person feels like when they come to the realization that two ideals that they have are clashing. Excuse me, that's something else. I apologize, it's different. Right, so the chitas Elohim, hachalat nigudim. Yeah, so the lesson of the ches is the ability to contain opposing values, even though they seem to be opposing, which is alluded to with the little top connector that connects the two Zions. How does the ches become one letter? There's something on top of them that's connecting them. Yeah. Rak or elyon ma'od yachol laset betocho sira gemura u'lechaber bein shnei kochot. Only a very, very supernal light is able to contain two values that are seemingly in opposition to each other, and that's being alluded to in this upward reaching connection between the two Zions. Harayon ha'elyon, I'm reading from Rav Kook now. Harayon ha'elyon mechaber et hazaynim yachad berum olam. The ideal, the supernal ideal, is able to combine the two Zions together in the heights of the world. Mitrat hasod musbar she'ein sof hu noseh hafachim. Right? It's an idea in the Arizal that one of the characteristics of the Ein Sof, of the infinite, is that it's able to hold opposites together.
Is that soul and body?
I don't know if soul and body are opposites in an ideal type of way. We're talking about opposites in like a value, right? Like what we were talking about before, the ideal of peace and harmony, and the ideal of standing up for yourself and even using aggression and force if necessary. Those are values that kind of clash, right? And you could say it's a point of personality, but that just means that there are different personalities that are more inclined to one value or another. Both are values. So how do you contain both of those things? The Gemara in Tanis it lists it gives a series of shot about the characters, the Giborim of David HaMelech, the elite troops of David that are listed at the end of Sefer Shmuel, and it kind of darshans the names of these people, explaining like what the connotations of their names are. And one of them is a warrior by the name of Ido HaEtzani. So the Gemara says Ido is implying like this soft, genteel type of character, like Eden, like very soft and calm. And Eitzani literally means strong like wood, like strong like a tree. So the Gemara says B'shas limudo hayarach kakana. When he sat in divine service, like when he was studying Torah, he was soft like a reed. He was soft and genteel. Right? B'shas milchama miskasha ka'etz. But when he was in war, he was hard like wood. Yeah. So it's the ability to apply both of those things and to be in a state where you can apply them objectively. It's interesting. This ties into the Maimar of Chassidus that we were learning on at Sudash Lishit, which we just finished yesterday. The language of the Balatanya is that the or of the mochin, right? The light of the intellect. The light of the intellect is able to guide opposing midot that seem not to be able to be compatible. Yeah. So when a person is in, right, so it's like even pictorially in the ches, it's like this protrusion from up above that's like emanating down. If you look at it from top down, it's kind of like it's like a triangle. It's emanate, right? This light is emanating down, and it's able to combine two zions, two life forces that are diametrically opposed to each other. Yeah. So that's like it's the light of the intellect, using the seichel, using the divinely inspired intellect that every human being has to be able to contain opposites. And I think that's why people are inspired by people that they have aspects of their personality that seemingly clash. It's inspiring to see that. It's inspiring to see one person that's able to contain opposite characteristics, because it's coming from a very high place. It means that person, his consciousness is so high that he's able to contain within him two seemingly opposite characteristics. So that's the ches, right? The idea of the ches. And one final point about the ches and the nature of fear, because this is a theme that's alluded to in the very name of the ches, right? Chitat implies terror. Yeah. So we talked about how there are many places in the Torah, many places in the prophets, rather, that talk about how fear is this force of expansion. Pasuk from the end of Sefer Yeshayahu in Perek Samach Aleph, it says, "Ufachad v'rachav levaveich," that the experience of the Jewish people in the time of Mashiach will be a terror that will widen the heart. That will be the experience. Ufachad v'rachav levaveich. Like David HaMelech prays for this widening of the heart, right? Sarot libi harchiva. May you please widen the strictures of my heart. And the strictures of the heart is this. It's that we're not able to be wide enough and expansive enough in order to be able to contain too many things. Like we're very narrow and we're very rigid, and we're not able to contain a totality. We're not able to make space for things. So there's a terror that it's not a terror that puts you into paralysis, but on the contrary, it's a terror that expands you to see the grandeur of the thing, that you want to be able to make space for the thing. So the takeaway from the ches is that it is possible to elevate oneself, to take oneself out of the smallness, to be able to contain opposing characteristics, right? To be both aggressive and genteel, to be able to be rigid and flexible, to be able to contain opposites is the message of the ches. Okay, so Ostes. Ostes is unique because, as we mentioned when we were talking about this, Tes is one of the letters that doesn't seemingly the name doesn't mean anything. Right? It's kind of like a mystery what the word Tes means. So Rav Kook says the following: Otzar Atov mitmaleh hapratim kulam mitmalim. What's unique about the Tes is that it's the 9th letter, and as we explained in our shir on Ostes, the idea of the 9 is that there are always 9 fundamental components to any phenomenon in the world. We call that, in the physical domain, we call that the 3 dimensions, and each side, so to speak, opens up to 3. We divided that into the domain of potential, which is usually equated with the intellect, the domain of actuality or of actualizing, which are usually associated with the emotions, and the idea of interaction, the domain of interaction, of interacting with the other, right? The 9 sfirot, the first 9 sfirot are all divided into these categories. The first 3 sfirot are all the intellectual, right? The Chachma, Bina, and the Das, intellectual, potential, in the ethereal. Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes are in the world of the emotions, actualization, coming into being in oneself, and Netzach, Chod, and Yesod are interacting with the other. Right? Those are the 3 fundamental categories of any phenomenon, of anything, whether it's a physical object or an idea or a concept. Those are always there. And the idea that there's 3 is that there always needs to be a balancing act, right? There's the outward movement, the withdrawing movement, right, or the discipline movement, and then the finding harmony between them. So there's always 3 aspects, and there's always 3 categories, which equals 9 elements to every phenomenon. Hapratiyut hi liolam gnuza. He talks about the idea of pratiyut, the idea of the private sphere. It is always in a state of concealment. Ein ishiyut achat mitgale lezulata, which means that there's always a private domain which is not being revealed. And pictorially, this is alluded to in the test, and that it's very unique how the test is the only letter which folds in onto itself. The right side of the test, the left head of the test, is folding in, dipping in. It's dipping its head into itself, so to speak. Right? And on the left side, you have the Zion, and as we explained with the Zion is always referring to, right, the primal yearning for life, which protects the private domain. So the two primary takeaways, I think, from Ostes is, first of all, understanding the makeup of all the elements of any one individual, recognizing these 3 categories, and each one of the 3 is divided into elements, understanding what the makeup is, and understanding also that there is that despite the fact that we're coming more into self, there's more and more self-actualization, and there's more and more interaction with the other, there's always a private domain which should remain private. And now that we're talking about this, I'm thinking that this is very powerfully connected to the idea of shtika. It's very powerfully connected to the idea of silence that Chazal talk about, right? And a few times in Maseches Avos, it talks about the idea of shtika. It talks about the idea of quiet, right? And the first time it appears in Maseches Avos is the name of Rabbi Tarfon, right? Kol yomai yeshavti ben hazakenim. All my life I sat amongst the wise. V'lo matzatzi laguf tov yoser min hashtika. I never found anything better for the body more than silence. Meaning constantly putting out content and expressing and projecting outward is not healthy. It's not healthy even at like a physical level, he's saying, right? L'masasi tov laguf yosem shtika. Even for the body, it's not good, right? There's a certain amount of withdrawal of privacy that needs to take place in order to maintain the stability of the individual. Quiet time, alone time, hitbodedut, right? Retreating into the self. This is something that needs to be inculcated and integrated into a person's practice in order to keep themselves healthy and stable. Yeah. So the pratiyut liolam gnuza. It's right. It always has an inward element that is withdrawing, right? Which is the test, which is folding in onto itself to protect its private sphere, its private domain. Osyod. Hamispar b'shleimuto ba'achdutam shel pratim kulam. The yud, right, we get to the end. All of the pratim have been gathered together. Right? The 9 elements that make up the whole, that make up the units, are all gathered together, and now we have the whole as such. We have the whole. So we talked about how you could look at anything in the world, and you can always break it down into smaller and smaller parts. You could ever point to the thing. You can say the table. You can never point to the table. You can point to the leg of the table, or to the top of the table, or the screw. You never point to the table. The table is a non-tangible phenomenon that is the product of all the parts coming together. Right. The sum of the part. Right. The sum is more than the. Excuse me. The thing is more than the sum of its parts. It's something that can't be touched. It can't be pointed to. Right. It's just an emergent phenomenon from when all the parts come together. Tzimtzum v'rikuz nigiat tziorit she'efes bo kol tar v'tzior. Right, as Rav Kook says, efes bo, there's zero description and quantifiableness. Yeah, I just made up that word. It can't be quantified or measured, the actual thing, the thing itself, because there's always just pieces. You can always just point to pieces, but the thing itself is not quantifiable. Hayud hapoeled mitmale b'gino ba'otzar hachayim, and this untangible self is where all the forces of life are welling up. B'itgalmuto mitbato al yidei hayud havaya v'hadalit shabo. Right. Very interesting. He's alluding to the fact that in the shape of the yud itself, so there's a dalid and a vav emerging from it. The small little kotzim. Did we come up with a good translation for kots yet? We've been using this. What? Not the crown. It's not a crown. The protrusion. The small. Right. A thorn. Right. But it's not. Doesn't quite grasp the idea. The small little protrusions. The small protrusions from the letter that aren't part of the letter itself, but they're just protruding outward from the letter. So the letter yud, there are these small little micro protrusions outward that are alluding to the vav and the dalid. They're alluding to the vav and the dalid. The bottom right leg of the yud is like coming down in the shape of the vav, and the left top part is in the form of the dalid. It's right. It forms the top left side of the dalid. So it's alluding to how the vav and the dalid are emerging from the yud. And what does that mean? It means that the vav and the dalid are the letters that describe spreading out. The vav is describing spreading out, from top down, and we talked about with letter vav last time. Right, the vav is the element that, right, it's the hook. Right, it hooks onto other things. It allows connection between two things, and the dalid is the spreading out to the 4 corners. Right, it's multiplicity itself. So the vav and the dalid, the potential for multiplicity are spreading out from the individual formless self, because they want to find expression. So what he's saying is that the self is always looking, is always yearning for a place of expression, even though in it of itself is not tangible. Hanakudahi havara ben efesiut el hayesh. The point, right, like the geometrical point, is always the movement from nothingness into something. Me'ached et erkei medida hanakuda hakav v'hashetach. Right, very interesting. That's the other point that he's the other idea that he's bringing about, in how contained within the yud are these 3 forms. There's the yud itself, the vav, and the dalid, which are alluding to the three base geometrical structures: the point, the line, and the plane. Yeah. So within the untangible self, there's the yearning to move out and express. Now, the takeaway from this is that the self is by nature not a fundamentally abstract thing. It's true, it has the characteristics of being abstract in the sense that it can't be pointed to, it can't be measured, it can't be weighed, there's no concrete qualities to it, but it's not disembodied. It's not disembodied. The Vav and the Dalet are trying to emerge from it. So there's no such thing as the self that is completely withdrawn from interaction. That's the point that he's trying to hone in on. That the Vav and the Dalet, the elements of spreading out and multiplicity, are always there. So there's no such thing as the self that isn't interacting. The self is always interacting. It's always yearning to interact, and that's the fundamental lesson of the Yud. Anything else worth highlighting over here? Okay, we said that. And that final idea that we said, that there's that the self is always looking for a context of embodiment, is alluded to in the name Yud itself, because Yud is alluding to the word Yad, which means hand, which is the limb of expression and action and doing. Yeah. Should we try to fit in Chaf quickly before we pray?
I'm down.
Yeah, let's fit it in quickly. So Chaf. This wasn't so long ago, so we kind of remember it already, right? So the Chaf is another step in the progression of consciousness. Chaf, in its name, is alluding to the Kaf Moznayim, right? The balancing of the scales. Hamautim ha'ne'arkim zelu umatzeh. Chaf in its numerical form are two yuds. It's two tens. So he said that 10 is the idea of a whole unit. So now you have two yuds facing off each other. Two yuds facing off each other are now being measured. They're being measured. Yeah, they're being weighed against each other. The element of kfiyah, of forcing, is also alluded to in the kaf, because kaf is alluding to kfiyah, like to force, right? To use force. Now, we talked about what is the idea of using force in this context. Force in the context of creating balance. So what Rav Kook says, I'm trying to find the line over here. He says that the individual thing, always by its if left to its own devices, the individual thing will always drift off into an extreme. It will always drift off into an extreme. And we talked about how this is like spiritual entropy, that things by their nature want to separate and dissipate from connections with each other. Yeah. So life in and of itself is an anti-entropic force that maintains a connection between things that would otherwise want to separate. Yeah. And the kaf, the balancing act of the kaf ma'aznayim, is this ability to stay together. And how does it stay together? With kfiyah, with a little bit of force. And we said that the kfiyah doesn't have to be like this force, beating yourself over the head with a baseball bat. It's like it could be a gentle prod also. But the gentle prod is necessary because again, if left to its own devices, the individual will drift off to an extreme. So there's always the gentle kfiyah that needs to be placed in order to make oneself compatible. Right? When a person is engaged in any activity, there always need to be integrated the aspect of kfiyah to be able to say, how is this activity affecting the people that I am responsible to? Yeah, that's the kfiyah, that's the forcing, right? The iskafia work of the subjugation that always needs to be there, right? The lashon of the Gemara in Brachos, Liolam isgaber, right? Yetzer tov al yetzer hara. A person needs to be mitgaber, right, with strength and force and aggression with his yetzer tov on his yetzer hara. What does that mean? Constantly, a person is all day long, right, yelling at yelling at his yetzer hara? No, it means that there is this natural tendency that a person left to his own devices will drift off to the extreme and not be thinking about anyone else. That's the natural tendency. So always to keep that tendency in check with the power of iskafia, with the gentle forcing. Hopefully it will remain gentle with the gentle forcing that allows a person to stay in balance. Perush, what does balance mean? That my existence is not coming into total conflict with the existence of everyone else. And of course, we don't want that, because if our existence is in the conflict of other people's existence, then no one can exist. And we always want to make sure that our existence is balanced in a state of kaf ma'aznayim with everyone else around us. So, Yishar Koach. Now we're back to where we started. That's it. Baruch Hashem, look. Yeah, Chazara in 2 sessions. Incredible.
Has the leadership thought about
How to handle?
holidays in terms of scheduling?
You're asking asking a scheduling question.